Hey guys, welcome to the Mom Show. I'm your host, Courtney Doyle, and this is a place I am giving you permission to not have it all together. Hey friends, today's episode is one of those conversations that will stay with you for a long time. I'm joined by my sweet friend, Crystal, a mom, ministry leader, children's book author, and stroke survivor. Crystal and I met a few years ago at a conference and instantly connected like old friends who had somehow missed each other growing up in the same hometown. And while she'll tell you that she's not naturally affectionate, I can promise you her hugs are some of the warmest you'll ever receive. But today's conversation isn't just about friendship. It's about survival, surrender, and the incredible healing power of God. You see, in 2016, Crystal suffered a massive stroke that changed everything. She was a high-functioning mom planning to homeschool her 3 children when suddenly she couldn't walk, speak clearly, or manage daily life. She takes us through the raw details, what she missed, what she learned, and how God kept whispering, "I will restore you." We talk about the emotional toll, the loss of identity, and the fears that every mom wrestles with, but how she clung to Jesus, literally and spiritually, through it all. If you've ever felt like you're hanging on by a thread, this is your reminder to make sure it's the hem of His garment. Let's dive into this honest, hope-filled story with Crystal. Hey guys, welcome back to the show. Today, I got a sweet friend for you, and her name is Crystal Mayo. We met a couple of years ago, Crystal, at a conference, and we're best friends. We're best friends, right?
Courtney needs to push me aside because I dearly love her so much, and for some reason want to cling to her every time I see her. So
Well,
Courtney is
and it's a
loved.
welcome clinging. It's a
Yes, I'm
welcome
glad,
clinging.
or else she would really be annoyed by it.
That is not true. That is
there,
not true.
there's just something about Courtney that I've got to be close and near, and then for some reason hug. And I'm not even that affectionate, but with Courtney I am. So
Well,
I love.
I'm not super affectionate either, and I've told you that, but a hug from Crystal is always a welcome hug. And so we are actually from the same area, born and raised in the same area, which is crazy that we didn't know each other and had to meet
Yeah,
each other 2 years ago
yeah,
in Michigan. What are the
Michigan.
chances?
Right. And I guess that's what it is. You just feel like home. I guess that's what it is. And
Yeah.
we get each other, I think. So
Yeah. Yeah,
I'm
we
glad we
definitely
met.
do. And I'm glad that you're here because you have an incredible story. And as you know, this season, I'm saying help. I'm a mom who, and I'm letting my guests fill in the blank. And so if I asked you to fill that blank in, help, I'm a mom who, what would you say, Crystal?
Who desperately needs help. And I feel like there's been different seasons of that.
Yeah.
And we'll talk about that. But right now, my help is I have a son graduating. So my middle son is graduating, and I have one younger than her, and I have one in college. It's just the day in and outs. And it feels like May is survival month. And
Mhm.
that's what we've just completed all the graduations and all the things, and I'm just surviving help. I need help
Yeah.
as a mom, just surviving.
Yeah. I get that. I get that. But you say you need help as surviving as a mom in the month of May. But I'm going to take you back to a moment when you really needed help surviving. And that's because you had a massive stroke. Will you tell us that story?
Yes, that was 2016. I had felt a calling to homeschool my kids. They had previously been in public school, and the oldest was going to be going into 6th grade, the middle 4th, and the youngest 2nd. And I was gonna homeschool, and I was planning to help with the tutoring and be a part of a co-op. And it was August. Mid-August, we had some prep work that we had to complete, some courses and some conferences we had to attend. And one of my best friends brought her kids over, her 3 children, so that I could watch them so she could go to the co-op for part of the training. So, as the kids are there, I'm just very dizzy. And when she dropped the kids off, she said, "Crystal, are you okay?" And I said, "I just have a headache and I don't quite know what's going on. Just feel a little dizzy. I'm sure it's just a migraine and I'll be fine." She was only going to be gone a few hours. And I went in, lay down on the couch. The kids are playing. Well, they kept getting into things that you would, stop them from like digging in the freezer, different things like that. And I could not think of the words of how to correct them. And so I just knew something wasn't right. And I called her and I said, I'm so sorry, but I'm going to need you to come get your kids. And so she did. She came and I said, I'm just going to lay here on the couch. And she regrets that she left me, but we just didn't know. And so I called my husband and said, something's off. I think you should come home. So he did. And we did call the doctor. They said that they could see me on Wednesday. So I had to wait a few days. This was a Monday. And then I went to the doctor on Wednesday, but they looked at my ears and said it was vertigo. And they said you could go see a specialist, but that would be out of town. So we looked at making that appointment, but that would be the following week. So I returned home. They gave me medicine, which just made me sleep all the time. By Saturday, we had some friends come in town. We had lunch with them, and I just wasn't myself. I was very silly and just not my typical self. And they left after lunch, and I went to go take a nap. All I've done was sleep every day for hours. And so I shouldn't have needed a nap, but I went and laid down. Before I did, I got on my knees and I said, Lord, if there's something more to this, could you show us? Could you show me? And so I laid down. And when that nap was over, I got up and toppled onto the floor when I took a few steps. So my legs weren't working as they should. They couldn't support the weight under me. I managed to crawl over to the recliner next to my bed and I called for my husband. And we monitored my blood pressure. Of course, it was high. And he said, I think we should just sleep for the night. And I was so mad. I could have thrown that blood pressure machine. I actually did try to attempt to throw it at him. But I was like, all I've done is sleep. I think we need some answers. So at that point, we went to the ER. They ran some tests. They did a CT scan and nothing showed. So that emergency room doctor told me I was having anxiety. And he said, sometimes you can manifest symptoms in your body from stress. And he just assumed that's what it was. We knew that wasn't right. We came home, reevaluated. We had sent our kids to our in-laws, dropped them off before we went to that ER visit. And then we decided we would drive to Houston. So Houston is 2 hours away, and we made the trek to Houston. Along the way, I was receiving phone calls. News were traveling faster than we were, and multiple phone calls, and I was trying to answer texts. My text messages were very garbled and jarbled, and you just couldn't understand what I was trying to say, but I could speak, I could communicate, but not through written word. So we had a few doctors call along the way. A friend had called to check on us and the one who had dropped her kids off. And I said, we're going to Houston and I'm just not sure what hospital. And she said, hold on, I want to pray for you. When she ran into a Sunday, this was on Sunday, she ran into a Sunday school room and her doctor was wrapping up his Sunday school class. And he said, would you please get on the phone with my friend? And he confirmed we should go to Houston, told us which hospital he recommended. And he actually prayed for me in that moment.
Mm.
And then just a few more miles down the road, our kid's pediatrician called. They had remembered I had not felt well that week and called to check on me. And I said, we were on our way to Houston. And I said, what hospital would you recommend? And he gave me the same advice as the other doctor. And so with those two confirmations, that's the hospital we went to. And when we were there, they almost sent me home after some time because I could communicate, but I was having trouble walking. But every time that I needed to go to the restroom, my husband would pick me up and carry me. So they never really saw that until the nurses let them know, hey, she can't walk. And they almost sent me home. And the head doctor came down and he said, I hear you can't walk. And I was like, no, I don't think I should go home. And he said, that's why you don't get sick in August because the residents are new and we have checks and balances in place. So let that be a note to someone. Don't get sick in August, but I'm kidding. But I was sent up for an MRI and at 1:00 in the morning, they woke me up and said, Mrs. Mayo, you've had a stroke and you'll be going to the stroke ward. So my husband went and gathered our things. They immediately were sending the transport team to send us up to the other floor. In that kind of busyness of everything that was happening, I just turned to the Lord and I was like, Lord, there was no words. And those earth shattering moments, that's just, what do you do? So I just felt like I was holding like all these broken pieces of my heart. Lord, what's happening here? And I heard 4 words. I heard him say, I will restore you. So that was a long journey to see restoration, but God's faithful. And those were some hard years. So it started that summer. I was planning that fall, I was planning to homeschool, but ended up not. The kids had to go back to public school and I had to take some time to heal. My
Yeah.
recovery was about 3 years and I
Oh
had
my goodness.
multiple rounds of physical therapy off and on.
So I'm going to take you back. What started as what you thought was a migraine. Do you have migraines? Is this something you experience, or was the migraine new as well?
It was new as well. Yes, I
Okay.
typically don't have headaches like that. Maybe once a month, occasionally, I would have a headache, but to me, it didn't seem out of the ordinary headache. I just had a headache. It was just,
Mhm.
I'm not feeling well. I have a headache. But the dizziness, what would have been, if I had known stroke symptoms, could have been a clue as to, Crystal, you might should get this checked out. I just wasn't aware. I was
Yeah.
38 at the time. So you're not typically thinking 38 years old. Year olds have strokes.
And the fact that you went
Right.
a week with these symptoms, multiple doctors have looked at you, they've done CAT scans, and now you've gotten in a car and you've driven 2.5 hours to Houston. Like, all of that is remarkable that you were living. I guess, did the stroke, did they ever say, did they think the stroke had happened earlier in the week? Or was it like,
They really can't pinpoint when. They think maybe when I couldn't walk on the Saturday, that maybe that's when it happened, but they never saw a clot, they never saw and really there was no answers. I stayed in Houston Methodist for 18 days, and I had the most brilliant minds working on my case, and nobody has any answers, and still doesn't to this day.
yeah.
Um, yeah.
So 18 days you leave. Were you able to walk when you left, or were you still weak?
I started with a walker, a cane. I walked in
Tandem?
tandem
Yeah.
with the physical therapist at first to try to get those reflexes back. You have to retrain the brain on how that works. And that process took me about 20 minutes when I would walk the halls. But at first, it did not make sense on how to walk. But after about 20 minutes, those pathways would start to click again, and it was easier to take one step after the other. But by
Mhm.
the time I went home, I don't believe I was using a walker. They had given me the self-confidence to know I could walk on my own, but I wasn't strong enough just yet. Had a lot of balance issues because I had left side weakness. I was partially blind. When you lose a sense, all the other senses go into they're accelerated. I could not be around lights. If they flickered, I was on the floor.
Mm.
Sounds were magnified, smells were off the chart. My mom wanted to take me to Dillard's just to go shopping, and it was overwhelming. The sound of the escalator, the perfume, just people chattering. It was deafening to me, and all I could do was cry as a reflex of all of the anxiety I was feeling, and
Mhm.
I just would have to leave until and it began I thought I would be okay going out into public, but I couldn't. I
Yeah.
had the hardest time, and so it was almost like I became a prisoner in my home because I was scared to go into the outside world just because of
Yeah.
fear of being able to manage it. So that in turn, like, that affected my ability to parent, and
Yeah.
at first, they didn't know if I could be at home by myself and they knew how badly I wanted to homeschool, and so they really my husband and family tried to really accommodate homeschooling, but I said, "They're just gonna have to go back. I don't feel good about having a sitter for myself and teaching my kids.
Mm.
The easiest fix is if they just go back to public school." And so that's what they did. And there were times that my in laws might correct my kids or aunts and uncles or something. And I just felt real useless as a mom. And I had been in ministry before, children's ministry, and I could plan so many activities and just a high functioning person. And I loved being on the go, but everything stopped when I had the stroke. It was much like the
Mhm.
quarantine before it was cool. So when the quarantine happened, I was ready for it. I'd
Yeah.
experienced it before. Hey, I know what to do. I had a little different
Yeah.
take on that.
And how did you respond to those limitations? Because the stroke brought physical limitations. Personally, of course, it brought the limitations for you not to be able to homeschool your children. I'm sure there was emotional and spiritual limitations. How did you respond to that?
I don't know that I did very well, but just I think that God gives us grace to go through the hard things that we're gonna have to go through, and I believe He would just give me the grace for one day, and I have a story that I tell. It's a children's book called Lucy's Home. It's the story of how my son wanted a dog, and it was a hard no for our family, but he prayed, and this dog ran into our lives, and she became my emotional support dog, and Lucy was one of those things that helped me cope. And so if I couldn't get off the couch, Lucy was right there beside me. And I can't imagine having my recovery without this dog. And I'm just thankful that God knows what we need before
Yeah.
we even know what we need. And so as I'm learning to strengthen and walk again, guess who my walking partner was? And
Yeah.
so all we did was make laps around my street, her and I, every day as I strengthened.
Mm,
And then really I had to lean into my community. I had a neighbor and two ladies from church who would drive me to physical therapy. So the kids went to school, they rode the bus there and back. And when the kids were in school, I was driving, chauffeuring because I just felt like they needed to be with me as well. If they were at school, they were at school, but I was gonna be there as soon as the bell rang.
yeah.
Like, I had to surrender that because I could not control it, and so I waited for them to get off the bus, and it was just the most anxious time waiting for them to get off the bus thinking, "Can I manage today?
Mm,
Will I be able to handle their sounds? Will I be able to answer their questions? Can I help them with their homework?" Because just too many things at once just overwhelmed me. And it was a really sad time for me, as in, can I cope? Can I even be what they need me to be? And yeah, there was a bit of an identity change there. My husband would say, just let them watch TV until I can get off from work. And that was an adjustment because I was full of, let's do homework first, let's eat a snack and get but I couldn't do for myself. They taught me in therapy how to cook, and one of the first things I did when I came home was I was determined to cook a pizza for my family. It's minor, a frozen pizza should not be hard, but my mental capacity was so skewed that when I went to reach in to take this hot pizza out, I forgot to put oven mittens on my hand, and so I
mm,
burned myself. So that just gives you the level of how I had a hard time caring for myself, much less my kids. And I think the enemy tried to play me with the fear of what if you're not fit to be a mom? What if you won't? What if your husband leaves you? And what if the kids get taken from you? What if you get put in a home and you
mhm.
don't get to see the kids anymore? So that plagued me. That was just one of those fears that overwhelmed me, and so I really tried my best to be all that I could be, but there was so many limitations that I couldn't perform, and I just had to surrender where I couldn't and try for a better day the next day.
Yeah. And I'm sure that the enemy was very present in the lies that he was feeding
Right.
you as you were trying to recover. And like what you just said, I can just imagine when you go from being so productive as a mom and then that's taken away and you're having to really relearn so many things. And I guess, did you realize in that moment, being a very present mom, doing all the things, being in children's ministry, did you ever realize in that moment that you had maybe lost your identity and your worth was tied to your motherhood? versus your identity being in Christ and realizing you were worthy regardless of how productive you could be as a mom?
Right. I think that my priorities were all off for sure. And I received such value from being in children's ministry because there was so many programs I was over that I created, and I had so many volunteers or employees that were in our department, and I loved and I thrived on it. Before the stroke, the Lord told me to stop, and it was an identity crisis. What am I going to do if I'm not doing that? Of course, I was a mom, but it to me didn't feel as fulfilling as all of their creative work on this other side.
Mm,
The Lord had to show me that there's much value in being a mom. And even when you feel like you're just a stay at home mom, you're not. And you're really tending to these kids and growing them up in the Lord. But for me, it just didn't feel as fulfilling as all of the other things. So even when I was in the hospital, it felt like, there was another visitation from the Lord. That first one was, I will restore you. But then there was another one where I felt like I could feel the presence of God, the Holy Spirit, and there was a conviction. The Holy Spirit does convict us of our sin, and I could feel that I was guilty of idolatry. And that just seemed so, I didn't understand it, but I confessed it and knew that's what it was. And then there was just a peace, when we confessed that. So that peace
yeah.
it just settled it. And I didn't
Mm,
realize that I had put that above the Lord. That was my identity. He called me into ministry, but I didn't know that I was letting it become more than it should have been, just something I
mm,
did for him rather than my all in all. Yes, I had to learn that our identity does come from Christ and not from the thing because there was nothing I could add value to. There was nothing I could do. I sat around for 2 years. The only thing I did was I went to therapy, and I had 2 people from my church and my neighbor who brought me to therapy 3 days a week, and that was my out, and they would sometimes stop and bring me to the grocery store. So one day after therapy, we stopped at the grocery store, and there was a Little Debbie lady there. Now, I had known there was 2 Little Debbie ladies, and they helped support the children's ministry I was a part of. Ran into them in the store. Now, I had to hold the buggy and the lights would flicker in the grocery store. It was the worst. So it was the hardest place for me to be. But I'm walking in and you need to get bread and milk and the essentials for the week. And my neighbor or the 2 ladies from church are helping me in the grocery store. So run into the Little Debbie lady. She's in the Little Debbie aisle. And she goes, Crystal. And I'm still kind of embarrassed because I know that this crazy thing has happened in my brain and I look okay on the outside, but on the inside, I know it's scrambled eggs. And I'm just wondering, can I even carry a conversation on with her? And she goes, Crystal, I heard what happened to you. And she said, I just want you to know that God is going to use this. He's going to use this for his glory. And he is going to, and she just starts prophesying all these things over me. And I don't even think she went to church, which is the funniest thing. And I just thought, wow, it was a promise of restoration that I could not see for quite some time. But I just knew the
mm.
Lord was speaking and that he was going to bring that restoration that he promised.
It's funny that you say that because what I was actually about to ask you, was there anywhere that God clearly showed up in the midst of your recovery? And that's so evident that he showed up in a Little Debbie lady saying, again, confirming what he had already told you, which is, I'm going to restore you and I'm going to use this for my glory. But you just made a comment that I think somebody else needs to hear, which is on the outside, you looked really good. But on the inside, due to the stroke, it was scrambled eggs in your head. And I think that so often on the outside as moms, we look like it's all good and we're put together, but on the inside, something could be very broken. And we've got to be aware of that. You were acutely aware because you were having physical symptoms and then you had a diagnosis that said, hey, this is what's happened in your body. But sometimes that scrambled eggs, they go undiagnosed and we continue to mask the reality of what's happening by just saying I'm fine and not
Okay.
recognizing that we're not. And
Right.
so That's a huge step. You were forced to surrender the idolatry that you were getting into, the overproductivity that you were getting into. It was probably going to bleed over into you homeschooling your children too. The look at all that I'm doing, but it was killing you on the inside.
Right. Yes, I wanted to wear a sign around that said, "Proceed with caution, stroke victim." And I really felt crazy, but I looked okay on the outside. When you break your arm, there's a cast and it shows someone, oh, there's a problem. But
Yeah.
when there's mental problems, you don't get to see those. Now, if I
Mhm.
have an MRI, there's a lot of massive damage in my brain, but you can't see
Mhm.
it. So I have whatever caused the stroke, it affected two sides of my brain. So it split. They said it was rare. And there's this huge section here and this section here. And I had been referred to a different neurologist, and he walked in the room. So he talked to me at first, and then he went and looked at my x-rays after, and he said, "Boy, do you know you had a massive stroke?" And it was like, "That's not even funny." "Yes, I do know that. That's why I'm here to see you." But you just could not see the damage. And that translates to moms in general, is that if there's a hurt inside, if there's scars, if there's something, they're not always visible, but they could be there. And that's how do you proceed with caution in those
Mhm.
seasons? Oh,
Yeah. What do you wish someone had said to you in the early days of your healing journey? When you felt unworthy, unproductive, when the fear was beginning to overtake you, what do you wish someone had said to you?
I wish that I would have I wish that I would have allowed others to help me. So that's not really somebody telling me. I guess if
Mhm.
I took some advice, it would be, you need help and it's okay to let some healthy people in to help.
Mhm.
We had a new pastor come. His first Sunday was the Sunday I had the stroke. And his dear sweet wife wanted to come over and wash my laundry for me. But I felt like I couldn't give that control over to somebody. If I could do anything, maybe I could still wash my own clothes. But it was one way that she volunteered to help, and I turned her away. I wish that I would have let my pastor's wife come over and do some laundry with me. One, because I needed a friend, but I was so scared to let her see the ugly. I really had always had this image of having it all together, but I was falling apart into pieces. And
Mm.
I remember seeing a t-shirt that says, "When you're hanging on by a thread, make sure it's the hem of his garment."
Mm.
That is where I had to end up, was holding on to the hem of Jesus's garment. There's a whole story for that. We might get another time, but I wish I would have let other people in because I didn't want them to see the messy. And I really just wish I would have let them come in, give me a
Yeah.
hand, and be that support. There was some, I've let them come and drive me. That was fine. But just the day in and day out, I was just afraid of what, because I didn't even know myself what all my limitations were yet. But
Mm.
I wish that I would have let those healthy people in to give me a helping hand.
Yeah. How have your children responded to this and watching your journey? What growth have you seen in your children?
It was definitely a hard time for them as well, some more than others. And some of them don't remember all of the things. I thought I would permanently scar them. But overall, I think it's made them somewhat compassionate and maybe aware that there could be problems. Not everything is picture perfect in life. That I hope, if anything, I taught them that they can cling to the Lord
Yeah.
in hard times and good times, and that He's where our strength comes from and He keeps His
Mhm.
promises. I hope those are the things they'll cling to. But I feel like we're 8 years, almost 9 years out. I think we'll still see the fruit of what happened in those years, but I feel like we probably need some more counseling. We probably need help, but at this point, they're thriving. They seem fine. They don't seem to remember things as they were. They just knew
Mhm.
mom had a holy timeout is really what happened.
A holy timeout. I love that. I think all moms need a holy timeout every now and then, and not in the form of a stroke,
No,
not in
but
the form of an
definitely
illness.
a time to take a breath, a breather, and to really evaluate what's going on in life.
Mm.
What am I putting priority to? And what do I not need to put priority to? Where am I
Mm.
missing the mark? And what does the Lord say? So I was too busy to listen. I was
Mhm.
going full steam ahead. We're going to homeschool it this way. I'm going to get this curriculum. My kids are going to be the best. The perfectionism was unreal. And I could not, after the stroke, I couldn't do anything that was worth
Mhm.
anything, it felt like. And my husband had to tell me, "You are worthy of this physical therapy. You are worthy to be treated, to be helped. You are, and then I had to learn that there was nothing I could do for the Lord. I felt like it was my mission to do these ministry and all these things for him. And then he didn't want any of that. He just wanted me. He just wanted to love me and for me to feel his love. And really, I think that's what I learned through that season of restoration.
How to fully surrender. Yeah. And isn't it just like the Lord to use this story, to use one of your children praying for a dog, for you to write a children's book? Like, you can see all the ways that this was lined up so beautifully. Tell us a little bit more about Lucy's home.
It's a true story. I have a copy here. It's a true story about a boy who wanted a dog. This is our family story. And before I had the stroke, I was caring for my dad. And on the way to my dad's house, he would beg and plead, "Mama, can we have a dog?" It was a hard no. Absolutely not. We will not have a dog. I'm not a dog person. Dad has said no. And we don't have room in our home for a dog. But he kept asking and asking. And this is the adventure of how this little sweet dog ran into our life. She first stayed with my dad in his last days. And then when my dad couldn't care for her, she came to our house. And Anthony believed God answered his prayers. And I guess the rest is history. But in the end, it says, even though mom was not a dog person, daddy had said no. And they did not have room for a home for a dog. Prayer changed everything because mama became a dog person. Daddy said yes. And they all made room in their home and heart for Lucy. And it really was, like I said, a blessing that this dog ran into our life because she was my constant companion through those really hard years.
And correct me if I'm wrong, Lucy literally ran into your life because didn't she just run into the front door of your dad's home or something? Like she was running on the road, something like that?
Yes, that's exactly how it happened. She
That's
literally ran into my dad's house, and we looked for those, for her original owners, and it wasn't until my dad couldn't care for her anymore, we ran into the real owner, and they said they couldn't keep her, and they wanted us to find a good home.
like,
She literally ran into her life. So God did answer that prayer, and I do say, just because you pray doesn't mean you'll get a dog, and you'll get a dog, and you'll get a dog. But God knows what we need before we even do. And
yeah,
this was an answer that he gave Anthony, and I was thankful he did because she was exactly what our family needed.
yeah, yeah. If there's a listener that's drowning right now, whether it's with health issues or exhaustion, maybe some mom guilt, what do you want them to hear most about your story?
If you hear anything, it's that you turn your eyes on Jesus. And I really don't want that to sound cliche or anything, but he was everything and is everything for me. So in those hardest moments, the Lord's been there. So I have my children's Bible. This was when I was a teenager. So it's very used, this Bible is. But this is when I really began to fall in love with the Lord. I had accepted Christ when I was a kid, vacation Bible school, but that relationship grew when I was a teenager. And I had gone through a hard situation. So my parents sat me down. They told me that they were going to be separating. And I turned in this Bible to Psalm 27:10. I don't know if you can see it there. It says, "Though my father and mother forsake me, the Lord will receive me." And it was the exact word I needed in that moment to know that whatever situation wasn't okay, the Lord saw me. He knew that. He knew our situation and he was going to carry us through. I could trust him. So that was the kind of the beginning of our relationship. So I would say if you know anything about my story, it's to cling to Jesus. And that is where I ultimately found my healing. And in those shocking moments when I was like, "Lord, what do you do? What has happened?" And he said, "I will restore you." You can't tell today that I had a stroke. It was a 3-year recovery, but praise the Lord, you can't tell today. And we all maybe not get those exact answers that we're hoping for, but he promised, and what he promises he will keep. And at the end of that time, I was in my closet for quiet time, and I just remember being so bitter that Lord, you promised, but I don't see the fulfillment of it yet. And I had been reading through the Gospels and came across the woman with the issue of blood. And I just had a thought. I took my husband's shirt and I put some sandals down below, put a shirt up, and I held that hem of that garment. And I cried out to the Lord and told him all of the problems I was feeling, all of my issues. And do you know that was the day things turned around? Because I think that I have a tendency to hold those things in and just like the Lord knows or something. But really, when I verbalized it and called out to him, that was the day that unbelievable change happened in my life. And so if anybody hears my story or if I offer any advice, I would say cling to Jesus, just like I did the hem of that garment. And there was nothing magical about my husband's t-shirt,
Yeah.
but the Lord is real and he cares and he is there in our brokenness and he is a restorer. He is a healer. And everybody's story looks different, but he has a purpose in the things that we go through. And I think he gives us the grace to take the next step. Even though it's hard, those days, those storms are hard, he gives us grace to get through.
It's interesting that you shared that story because last night I was busy doing something and I walked in the living room after cooking dinner and three of our boys were watching The Chosen.
Mm.
And that was the scene. It was the
Oh,
woman with the issue of blood. And she's saying, I don't feel worthy. I'm not a daughter of anybody. And of course, he bends down, the actor, and he says, who's portraying Jesus, and he says, but you are a daughter. You're my
mhm.
daughter. And then he reassures her that it wasn't his garment at all that healed her, it was her faith. And that whole scene, I walked into it and I've already seen it once before, and every time I see that scene, I just cry. And just her willingness to come to him and her belief that he could provide for her and her faith. And so your faith is an encouragement because I know that was not an easy 3 years. I know that every now and then you and I, when we're talking, you reference that there are still some residual things that
Mm.
are from the stroke that you're like, yeah, maybe memory or different
Memory.
things like that. And he just continues to show up and bless you and use you to be a blessing to others in such an incredible way. I close out every episode with, is there something you're praying for that we could join you in prayer? And do you have a verse that you want to share with us? And it could be the same verse you just read. Totally up to you.
As you were saying those last things about faith, sometimes I think back to the scripture of where he says, do you believe? And he's talking, I can't remember the context. I'm so sorry. And the person answers back, I do believe, but help my belief. So
Yeah.
sometimes I feel like we might have faith that can move mountains. And some days we might be like, I don't believe. And
Mhm.
Lord, help me believe. And so, what am I praying? So, what I'm doing now is I'm reading through scripture and I read an Old Testament, a New Testament, a proverb, and a psalm. And I've been going through David's story. And what interests me recently is that the promise is given that he will have a forever lineage throughout King David. And he promises it'll be through his son. So, this is before he sees Bathsheba being in the wrong place at the wrong time, but yet he will give that promise of that son that isn't even a speck in his dad's eye yet, and that promise is going to come. Truly, my prayers are, help me today, Lord. Help me to do what I'm supposed to do, to not say anything I'm not supposed to say, and to say what I'm supposed to say, especially in parenting. I feel like I mess up so much, as in, okay, maybe I shouldn't have said that, or maybe I should say that. I don't know. Sometimes
Yeah.
our kids need to see the crazy. But so definitely my prayers are, help me, Lord, today. Help me to be your hands and feet, really should be our prayers for every day. But also, help me when I'm not believing. Help me when I'm not seeing. Help me in all the things that aren't the way they should be. But thank you, Lord, for the things that are. So
Mhm.
it's gratitude and the other side as well.
Yeah. Yeah. Thank you so much for sharing your story and being vulnerable. I know it's not easy to do that. And so I appreciate your testimony and your willingness to share it with us.
Thanks for having me. I love you, girl.
I love you too. Thanks so much for listening to The Mom Show with Courtney Doyle. Remember to check the show notes for any links, books, or resources that are mentioned in each episode. We want to be sure this blesses other mothers, and in order to do this, if you're listening via podcast, be sure that you like and share. If you could write a review, that would be fantastic. It helps us get in front of other moms. If you're watching via YouTube, be sure to hit that subscribe button. This way, you won't ever miss an episode. We want to make sure that we increase our reach to other mothers who need a little encouragement, a community, and a whole lot of Jesus. We're so glad you're here.